Okay, here they are. All the books I read this year. Oh my goodness. These videos are so fun to look back on, but man, are they a pain to put together. So yes, here are all the books that I read this year. So let's move over to my spot over there and talk about it. Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Courtney and today I'm going to be discussing my year in books, or my 2020 reading statistics. I just finished filming my book highlight best books of the year video as well, and I'm very tired from moving all the books outside and downstairs and back upstairs and moving all these books over here. And so yes, there will be some accompanying photos, but mostly with these statistics I'm going to be doing pie chart graph type things. Let's get into my reading statistics. Last year was the first year that I did a reading statistics video. I had a little spreadsheet on Google and I tracked what I read. Of course, I was following Kayla's or Books and Lala's example of how she tracks things, I guess, and I loved her end of the year videos, so I wanted to kind of mimic that. As you will see, there are a lot of similarities between those videos and mine, and I've really enjoyed this process. The first year I did this, last year when I did this, I was tracking like publishing, the star rating, general stuff like that, but it also gave me the opportunity to take a very careful look at the representation and the diversity that I was reading. At the end of 2019, when I looked at my stats for diversity, because I was looking at race, ethnicity, and then queerness of my authors, I very quickly realized that I wasn't doing what I wanted to be doing with that statistic. One, first of all, in 2019, I didn't really share these statistics. Obviously, you could just look at what I had read and kind of figure it out, but I didn't share it, and I went kind of like on a big discussion about tracking like people's ethnicities, skin color, and stuff. I do still believe this. One, it is very difficult because you don't always know just by looking at a person like what they identify as. Sometimes you can't tell. Same with queerness, especially if they're not out of the closet. And so sometimes those statistics are really difficult to figure out. And then the other thing is like, you know, if I'm tracking it, if I'm trying to reach a certain goal, am I tokenizing? Am I just reading to read and feel good about myself? There's a whole business with tracking statistics like that. But looking at my 2019 statistics and just seeing how poorly I had done, it wasn't bad. Definitely I had read people of color, as we'll get into with these statistics, but I wasn't reading as diversely as I thought I was. And it's kind of like that thing of like, oh, I did read people of color that year, and you know, thinking I'm okay because of that, and you know, I can say that I've read a lot of them and I could recommend people stuff. I knew in 2019 that I wasn't doing the work that I wanted to, and I just wasn't reading as diversely as I wanted to be. And just for me that year, realizing the disparity between what I thought I was reading and what I was actually reading was like really important to me, and it really enforced how I wanted to go forward into 2020, and that I wanted to improve those statistics, and especially in this year, 2020, June, with not just like the Black Lives Matter movement that was happening at that time, but also a lot of the publishing stuff that was getting kind of, I don't want to say unwrapped because we kind of knew a lot of this stuff before, but it was finally getting exposed on a larger level. This stuff becomes even more important to me because as a consumer, I'm the one who's changing what is being bought by publishers and agents and stuff like that. But it's also just for myself. I like learning new experiences. I like to read diversely. I really do. And I can't really say that if I don't do that. And luckily, this year I improved a lot of those statistics. I was reading a lot more consciously. I think that's the main thing that I'm taking away, and why I'm going to be more transparent with my statistics this year is because it holds me accountable and it makes reaching goals easier. I don't want to make reading Black books or reading BIPOC books like a statistic to reach, but I think being held accountable is important, especially if it is a real goal that I want to reach. I've just been watching like a lot of people videos talking about this, live shows talking about reading diversely and stuff like that. It's going to be a long road. I'm not perfect, especially in this area. I've never claimed to be. I don't think, I hope not. Even though statistics are like lower than I want them to be, I can see the improvement from last year, and I know it's going to take little small steps to get there, and that's why I want to be transparent, because if I'm transparent then I can actually put the work into making a greater change. But anyway, we are going to get into those statistics last, and first we're just going to go over some more basic statistics. So firstly, I read 105 books this year. On Goodreads, I think I had it at like 102, 104, maybe somewhere around there. I had some rereads that I did not count on my Goodreads, that I didn't count on my Instagram. The first statistic we are going to get into with that is the ones that I read. So as you can see by this lovely picture, I read pretty continuously throughout the year. I think February was my worst month with 4 books. Pulling this off of the top of my head, I think I'm doing a pretty good job. And then my best month was July, I believe. I did some rereading then that month as well. June was also a great month, so was October. All the summer months are normally pretty good. During the end of the year into fall, I normally have a good reading pace, depending on homework wise. If I can find a picture, let's compare 2019 reading months and 2020 reading months. And so I'm assuming it's probably very, very similar. I think I was a little bit more sporadic in the year of 2019 with reading, where I was much more continuous with reading in these months. Fun thing to note, in 2020, I'm sure you can see that in March and I believe April as well, I did have a big jump in reading, and that is because of quarantine. No surprise. Reading lots of audiobooks while I played Animal Crossing those months. So next, let's get into my star ratings. So my star ratings for 1 stars, I had no 1 stars. 1 stars I review for books that just are like very distasteful, offend me in any way, so I didn't read any of those, which is great. For 2 stars, I had 3 books. 2 of these are full 2 stars. They were books that I had to read for class, and then the other one I believe was a 2.75 stars, which just gives it more of an average rating. For 3 stars, I had 25 books. I rated a lot of 3 stars this year, more than normal, I believe. And then for 4 stars, I had 47 books. This is my normal one. If I have a book that's like 3.75 stars, I normally bump it up to a 4 stars on Goodreads, so it's not really surprising that there are a lot of 4 stars. And then for 5 stars, I had 30 books, but a lot of them are manga. I rate most of my manga 5 stars, so if you put aside the manga and you put aside my rereads, which I probably gave 5 stars to as well, you will be seeing that I only rated 7 new books as a 5 star. So 7 whole books got the full 5 star, which is not a lot. I gave a lot of books 4.5 stars, not a lot of 5 stars. Next, we're going to be looking at genre with this lovely pie chart. For fantasy, I read 41 books. For sci-fi, I read 8. I believe that's up from last year. For speculative books, this is not just speculative fiction, this also includes fabulous fiction, surreal, paranormal, just anything that isn't hard fantasy, high fantasy type stuff, or anything that isn't hard sci-fi falls into the speculative fiction camp, and then anything kind of weird, fabulous, surreal also ends up in the speculative umbrella as well. And I read 16 of those books. I read 4 historical fiction books, 3 classics, which is a lot lower than normal, I believe, 29 contemporaries, and then 4 nonfiction essay collections. I'm really glad that I read more essay nonfiction this year, and it's something I plan to continue into the next year. For page count, my average page count was 323 pages. My longest book was 576 pages, which was basically just any volume of the Full Metal Alchemist series. I read the entire Full Metal Alchemist series this year. I bought it at the beginning of quarantine. And then my shortest book is another comic book. So at 53 pages, we have Princess Ever After by Kay O'Neill. This was super, super cute. I read all of Kay O'Neill's stuff this year, or most of their stuff this year, and I really, really enjoyed it. And then for age groups, I only read 2 middle grade, 74 YA books, and then 29 adult books. I'm not fully past middle grade. I do still enjoy a middle grade from time to time, and of course I do love the YA releases, especially the queer lit releases, but I think going into 2021 I will be reading a lot more adult. That's where a lot of books are really interesting me right now, and that's kind of why middle grade is falling off, because I'm reading and picking up more adult books. For format, I read 13 comic books, I read 20 mangas, 32 audiobooks, and then 40 physical. For the audiobook and physical book category, this isn't quite exact. Sometimes I read along with an audiobook, just depending on the book. I either put it as physical or audiobook, but for that one I'm just not sure exactly where it is, if I listen to the book more or not. For publication dates, I read a range of publication dates. My oldest book was Robinson Crusoe, which was published in 1719. It's one of the first novels, so there you go. And then for new releases, I read 34 2020 releases, which is up from last year. year. I'm really excited about that. That was one of my goals. I wanted to read more 2020 releases. I wanted to stay on top of new releases, and so I'm really happy about that. And I actually have a whole video talking about the 2020 releases that I ended up reading, so definitely check out that video if you're interested in which ones I read. Now getting into sequels. So for comics, I read 20 sequels, not counting the comic books or the mangas. I read 26 sequels. I also finished out some series, and there's a bunch of other books where I read the second book to the series. So I'm really glad that I stayed on top of that. That was one of my goals, was to stay on top of sequels. And then for rereads this year, I reread 5 books, I believe. So that's really great. And so let's get into those authors' statistics, which I kind of had a long-winded rant about at the beginning. So this was something that I was conscious of in 2019, but I didn't really have any particular goals set for 2020. Of course, I wanted to read more diversely, but I didn't have any specific goals for that. But I did keep better track of it, or more conscious track of it. So getting into authors' genders, again, this is like a tricky thing because sometimes they don't say in their bios. I read 81 female authors and only 8 male authors. I'm not really mad about that statistic, to be honest. It doesn't really make me mad. And then I read 7 books written by multiple people, so there was normally a man and a woman working on those projects. Those could be comic books, those could be regular books as well. And then going into trans books, I only read 10 books by trans people, 8 of which were non-binary. I'm really glad that I read a lot of non-binary authors. 8's not really that many, but I'm glad I did read more than last year. I can wholeheartedly say that I read more than last year, but still, going forward into this new year, I want to read more books by trans authors. Not necessarily always about the trans experience, but that is important to me as well. And I do believe that there's a lot of trans and non-binary authors coming out with books in 2021, so that is exciting. For countries, I read 68 from the US, 20 from Japan, 11 from the UK, 3 from Australia, 1 from Canada, 1 from Ireland, and 1 from Wales. This statistic is sad but not surprising. Like I said, I watched a lot of live shows about how to read diversely, and one of the categories that they talked about was reading translated works. And it was something that I never really thought about, but obviously it's a way to read from different countries. It's a way to get out of a strictly Western, strictly American mindset with your reading. And it's just not something that I've ever really actively thought about. I really love the idea of reading translated works. It's just not something that I've ever seeked out, but it's something I'm definitely going to be thinking about going into 2021, because all of the translated works mostly in my life have come from manga. There's a lot of Korean novels that I want to read that have come out, and I'm sure there's books from other places as well. I just have to look into it and be more conscious of it. I think that's what this statistic thing was really about for me, was like being conscious of what I'm reading, and that's kind of why I want to be transparent, because when I'm conscious of it, then I can do better. So with that, let's get into the race stuff, which I didn't really disclose last year. So for this year, I read 62 white authors. That is 54% of my reading. I read 12 black authors, which is 11% of my reading. I read 6 unspecified Asian authors, which is 5% of my reading. I read 20 Japanese authors, which is 17% of my reading. I read 3 Korean authors, which is 3% of my reading. I read 1 Malaysian author, which is 0.8% of my reading. 1 unspecified Middle Eastern author, which is 0.8% of my reading, 1 Persian author, which is 0.8% of my reading, 1 Indian author, which is 0.8% of my reading, 5 unspecified Latinx authors, which is 4% of my reading, 1 Dominican author, which is 0.8% of my reading, and 1 Native Indigenous person, which is 0.8 of my reading. So in total, I read 114 authors. I believe this counts repeats and then books that have multiple authors. So that means I had 62 white authors, which again, 54% of my reading, and then 52% of my reading was people of color, which is 46% of my reading. So it is a little bit more even. We'll get into the comparative statistics in a minute, but 54 to 46. Not great, but it's almost even, so it's better. And then for my LGBT reads, this just means that the main character of the work is LGBT, which most of the time means that the author is also LGBT. But just know that this statistic is based on the main character being LGBT, not necessarily the author. For instance, the Raven Cycle would never be categorized as LGBT because the main character is not LGBT. I think they're all queer, but That's just a headcanon. So anyway, for 2020, I read 48 queer novels, which is 46% of my reading. 46%. That is almost 50%, which is great for me. So in 2019, I read 107 authors in total versus my 114 authors in total this year. So that's kind of the comparative that we're looking at. So sometimes the numbers may go up and down. We're looking at the percentage. How much did it increase? So in 2019, I read 64 white authors, which was 60% of my reading. And then my non-white authors were 43 books, which was 40% of my reading. So I went up a whole 6% from 40% to 46%, which is great. That is a great improvement, almost 50%. I don't want to be proud of myself because I'm doing the normal work that I should be doing as a reader, but it is really gratifying to know that being conscious of this really did help with these statistics. But no, I'm not giving myself a pat on the back for doing the bare minimum, but I am proud of myself for doing the work that I needed to be doing all along. So for Black authors, in 2019, I read 6 Black authors, which was 6% of my reading, so I went up 5% to 11%. For Asian, 31%. When I add up all of my Asian authors from 2020, it is 31%. It's pretty much the same. But I will say in 2020 I read more variation, so I didn't just read Japanese authors. I read also Korean, Indian, Malaysian, Chinese. It was more of a range. And then for Middle Eastern, I only read 2 in 2019, which is the same as 2020. And then for Latinx, I read 2 books, which is 2% of my reading for 2019, which means again I went up 3% to 5% of my reading, 5-6% of my reading. And then with Indigenous, I didn't read any books by Indigenous authors in 2019, and I read 1 in 2020, so better, but still kind of disappointed with myself for not being more aware of that and not doing better about that. And then for LGBT books, LGBT plus queer books, I read 29 books in 2019, which was 29% of my reading, which means I went up 17%, 29 to 46%. So that was a great increase. And that's kind of what I'm looking at with these comparatives. The areas that I'm still very weak in, at least I improved. That's what I got from a lot of the live shows, is that to make a sustainable change in your reading, you have to just be consistent with it, and it's going to be small changes over time. It's not gonna go up to 50% overnight. You have to put in the work. Small changes to your reading is how you make a lasting change in how you read. As my second year of tracking this, I'm glad again that being conscious has increase those statistics, that I am taking the first small steps in my reading. So as it gets darker and darker in my room, let's close this video out. I went over a lot of statistics very quickly, and I kind of rambled a little bit and kind of hinted at some of my goals for 2021. I'm going to be tracking my reading in 2021. At first I wasn't going to track it in 2020 because I was having trouble with the Google Sheet, but I think this proves to me that I have to be doing this because it is very important for me. But yes, I have clear reading statistic goals for the coming year. I didn't have any goals this year besides read more. In 2021, I'm going to be very specific with the statistics that I want. So definitely look forward to my reading goals of 2021 video. I'm sure that will be coming out in the near future in a couple weeks. So stay tuned for that because I'm really, really excited for reading this year. But again, thank you so much for watching. I'm really proud that I read like 105 books. At the end of December, I was just so surprised because I reached 100, but I kept on reading, and I only read a couple more books over 100, but it's always nice to exceed your expectations for yourself. And in the coming year, maybe I'll read 100 books, maybe I won't, who knows. There's a lot of changes coming in the new year. I'm really excited to be reading again. It's my favorite thing. Okay, these statistic videos are so interesting and fun for me. But thank you so much for watching. Again, look forward to my videos coming in the future. I'll see you guys later, and happy reading.